No other sport seems to change its laws like rugby. Despite the product on the pitch being broadly the best it's ever been, it's rare to see a season go by without 6 new rules and 14 interpretations being floated, as though anytime you get enough World Rugby officials in the same room, they can't resist the urge to just go, no, but what if we did force the fullback to wear a Halloween mask for the first 60 minutes? Rugby does not need any more law changes. It doesn't need constant tweaks, and yet this very autumn, World Rugby gave us one that really works. A superb change, a brilliant new law in the form of the new blocking rule. In theory, nothing has changed. The actual wording in the rulebook is exactly the same as it was before. When a player and an opponent are both running for the ball, both chasing a ball, neither may push or change their line to obstruct the other, except minor shoulder-to-shoulder contact. And the sub-laws, an offside player must not intentionally obstruct an opponent or interfere with play, and a player may not intentionally prevent an opponent from tackling or attempting to tackle the ball carrier, are exactly the same as they've been for a decade. However, over the last 3 months, the way referees are told to interpret and particularly enforce all 3 variants of the blocking law has changed fundamentally. And whilst the ramifications on the game have been subtle, it's created knock-ons that totally rejig the tactical balance of the sport for the better, whilst creating endless strategic possibilities and changing the way that your team no doubt play. There's a few main ways this difference has been felt. The first is simple. This sort of thing used to be commonplace. When intending to hang a box kick, teams would leave a lumpster next to scrum half's kicking foot, meaning that anyone looking to charge down the ball would have to work around them, work past them, making successful efforts to charge the ball down incredibly rare. And yet charge downs are brilliant moments. They always have been. The visceral slow motion shot of someone flying through the air, arms outstretched, giving everything, and leaving the opposition in utter panic, crisis after the ball deflects off their forearms is peak sporting drama. Chaos created, even when they don't lead to tries. Think Faf de Klerk in the last World Cup final. That's a game changer that virtually guaranteed the Box win in the last few minutes. However, referees have now been told to clamp down and penalise if this guy remains around the fringes. The lumpster can no longer just stand their ground. They have to actively work to get behind the kicker at all times. And as such, the number of charge downs we see has gone up exponentially. Japan's Warner Dearns charging down Antoine Dupont and almost going all the way was a desperation tackle away from being a beat we'd be talking about for years to come. Eben Etzebeth creating havoc at Twickenham as he nailed Jack Van Poelvik's timing, leading to this kind of hilarious try for Peter Stefatoya. Double charge down is brilliant. These create moments of broken field play similar to turnover or good kick exchanges. And they work both ways. Look how Marcus Smith here managed to turn a charge down into England's advantage, into profit and a huge net gain in territory. For the last 10 years, box kicks have become the backbone of rugby tactics because they were foolproof, fail-safe. You can hang it right near the ruck, meaning no effort is wasted getting it over the initial defensive line. You get more protection and hence less chance of being charged down than when hung off 10, and you have as much time as you like to set your chase perfectly before the ball enters the air because everyone is going to be behind the kicker. And yet, that law change combined with the fact referees now being stricter than ever on the 5-second use it law, most refs now yelling when a team has just 2 seconds remaining, has increased the pressure on scrum halves tenfold, making a pinpoint bomb no longer a guarantee from the scrum half. Because even when you don't create a charge down, the opportunity that you can open up by putting pressure on is enormous. A month earlier, Tate McDermott here likely gets plenty of distance on the ball with all the time in the world, but now, with Maro Itoje inches away from his kicking foot, he has to prioritise height in order to avoid the charge down and hooks the kick, only just getting it away and frankly doing well to even make it up to the 22. The ball scarcely making touch, allowing Randall to go quickly and giving England the opportunity to attack a disorganised and frankly knackered defensive line, leading to a try for Ollie Slightholme on the far touchline. All of this comes from this new law allowing Itoje to put more pressure on the kicker. And if your kicker isn't outstanding, that's going to happen. This might seem small, but it's changed the entire meta of Test rugby. Box kicking is still extremely useful, but the nerf applied by World Rugby doesn't depower how beneficial a good kick can be when you get it away, but charge downs and timeouts now being a legit threat to scrum halves means there's so much more of a gamble involved, and unless your scrum half is truly outstanding, much lower odds to get it spot on, as your 9 is now under pressure at every kick. The best bit, however, is not the change, it's the ramifications. Every team has adapted differently. Argentina, for instance, only seem to kick off 9 when the scrum half in question is Gonzalo Garcia. Without pressure, Gonzalo Bertranou and Latano Bazan are both really good kickers, international standard easily. Bertranou's boot in particular was heavily used over the World Cup, but when pressure is on, both players' accuracy has dropped so far the Pumas have had to change their entire kicking game plan. Now constrained, trained, Contepomi's cackle reverted to kicking almost entirely off 10, completely changing the tactical element of their game. Straight bombs are less use when kicking from that deeper fly-half position, as the opposition will always have less distance to travel than your chasers, who are starting 15 metres back, forcing Argentina into basically switching up their kicking tactics entirely. Instead of the high balls they relied on over the Rugby Championship, they've instead resorted now to kicking long for territory, which in turn twisted their entire game plan. Argentina had the majority of possession in just one of their last 6 games before the law came in, but in all 3 since. The change in kicking tactics meant they tend to play a few more phases around midfield before kicking the ball away, as the chance of them getting it back immediately would be drastically lower, unable to compete in the air. Their average tackle count increased, therefore, from 138 in the Rugby Championship to 186 in the autumn, despite having a higher overall percentage of the ball, because when they do kick it away, they're not getting it back immediately. France did something similar, box kicking much less during the autumn, playing more rugby around halfway than they did previously. Australia, on the other hand, are actually now box kicking more, although that has to do with the other emphasis shift in the laws. Previously, after the opposition team hung a kick, when chasing back, a player was allowed to run at whatever pace they liked, including pretty much stopping dead as long as they didn't deliberately change their line to move into the path of a chaser from the kicking team. Over the last few years, however, coaches have started exploiting this, creating something that became known as the Escort or convoy, named after 2 things you tend to find in car parks and motorway service stations. England and South Africa got particularly good at this. The idea was, when the opposition set to kick, you'd plonk a big group of forwards in the path of the chaser, who would coordinate their lines to make access to their team's catcher almost impossible. These players often just stopping dead before the point the ball's coming down to prevent the opposing winger getting through, meaning they're only able to make a tackle well after the ball had been caught. In the laws of the game, this isn't technically obstruction, because nobody's deliberately moving into an opposition player's lane, rather just making sure the entire road is blocked off. However, now players have to actively keep moving until they're behind the catcher, or at least in a realistic position to catch the ball themselves. Slowing down deliberately or stopping is now viewed the same way as blocking. This led to the odd force of habit penalty over the first month or so. Every previous game he'd ever played in his life, this wouldn't have been a penalty against Adam Beard, but it absolutely is one here because the law changed 2 days beforehand. But now that we're 3 months on, player behaviour has adapted and we aren't seeing these similar accidental breaches of the law, and instead we're just getting the upsides. Now, I've always been against laws being changed to solve a problem that really should be on players or coaches. A dominant scrum's being overpowered? That's on the opposition front row and scrum coach. There's too much kicking or forward carries? Then come up with some strategies or attack structures that deal with that. But this kicking law has kind of done the exact opposite. Teams for the last 2 or 3 years have kind of settled into all kicking the same way, particularly off 9, inspired by the way the Springboks and Warren Gatland's Wales basically broke the system around 2018-19. With every team now running an escort, it became pretty rare that the chasing winger ever actually got into position to contest the ball. As such, almost every international side would kick the ball longer, usually around 30 metres, 35, 40, with plenty of hang time, looking to instead pressure the catcher once the ball came down. Every kick gives you 3 chances to pressure the opposition and potentially win the ball back. Number 1 in the air, number 2 from the resulting tackle or breakdown, and number 3 on the first phase defensively, because your defence is almost always going to be set better than the catching team's attack. It's just the nature of running into a straight line is easier than going and setting up in a fancy attacking formation. Thanks to Razzie and Warren mastering these arts so well, teams had largely given up on number 1, relying instead entirely on numbers 2 and 3. This made wingers like Curtly Aronser and Josh Adams invaluable, as they're both so good at busting the convoy. Aronser slaloming around, where Adams would often just straight up run into them, full pelt, forcing them to move. These wingers would then often look to either force a knock on from the catcher or make a huge shot defensively to set up a counter-attack effort on the following phase, then put them on the front foot in defence. However, now escorts are illegal, news that devastated Lawrence Eladio, suddenly the winger has a clean path to get those 30-metre kicks themselves and contest in the air. This has brought aerial contests back into the game big time, something that's sort of died out over the last 3 years. These battles are moments of fantastic drama. 2 wingers knowing the result of a 2-second bout of focus and athleticism is worth 30 metres of territory, something that can decide a game. As such, players like Joseph Swaley, Freddie Stewart and Hugo Keenan, who are all sublime in the air, have made themselves invaluable. And I wonder whether in the next year we'll start to see a shift in the current positional template happen, with more players like Stewart and Keenan deployed on the wing for their chasing ability, with either an extra kicking option or more lethal counter-attacker instead at fullback, because this is also opened opportunities for some fun at the back. Straight counterattack tries remain rare still, but these laws have led to looser kicking, lighter changes, and more long thumps, such as what we're seeing from Argentina, giving back three players more time. Teams are now, instead of sending one big unit, just sending one or two of their fastest players, chasing full pelt all up. And as such, it's led to a big increase in players running from deep. England in past years might have had the fullback just hang a kick and return here, but this autumn they tweaked that strategy in reaction to the ease chase. First allowing the likes of George Furbank, Marcus Smith or Freddie Stewart to have a crack, to have a run themselves against that lighter line, then if nothing came off, then kick it back on second phase, usually box kick back in return. It's a more reactive, open, free approach to rugby. Marcus Smith in particular had a few decent stabs from 15, and it raises a question. The last time aerial contests were this in vogue, back around 2014 to 17, we saw a big trend of smaller players being moved to fullback. With the wing being used for aerial contests, fullbacks generally had more time on the ball and more elusive runners were more effective from deep than wide out. As such, I wonder whether in the coming year we might see the likes of Cheslin Colby, who was moved back in that era and then shifted back to the wing, and Louis Bielberet slide into that 15 shirt. Fullbacks are being given more time to launch counterattacks and put in tandem with the 50-22 law, meaning that teams rarely keep just one in the backfield anymore these days. It might create drastically more options on the kick return. And whilst that speculation, we are already seeing a really varied tactical shift. Where previously teams bluetering knew pretty much exactly what was coming, every box kick now gives us at best a 50-50 outcome, and that's completely revolutionised the way every team this autumn has played, creating a much more varied, creative and exciting kicking game, with no one having yet found a way to get around this rule to create a tactic that is as foolproof as the box kicking convoy approach used to be. Scotland have largely reverted back to the old school, hang it up for a winger to go and chase in the air, arms out trying to take it on the full. However, the most interesting part of this is the further headache this creates for Greg Townsend, the head coach. Glasgow winger Kyle Steyn is comfortably the best at this aerial chase Scotland has available, yet he's vying for those wing spots against Duan van der Merwe and Darcy Graham, Scotland's number 1 and number 2 top try scorers of all time respectively, and it begs the question, are these 30-metre blocks of territory that he can win if they continue playing this tactic worth more than someone who can score at will once he gets you into those positions? Italy, on the other hand, have made their decision on that front and abandoned the tactic altogether. Off almost every box kick, they now look long, booting the ball into the backfield and often setting a full line to chase instead of sending one isolated chaser up to go and win it back or smash them. This has given them more license to select smaller, nippier wingers likes of Monty Iwani, Jacopo Trula, Lewis Liner and Ange Capowoodzo, and hence concentrate on that counter-attack instead once the opposition kick it back. Their kicking game is much more about trying to put the opposition in positions where they kick it back to them so Italy can then in turn counter-attack. Italy have opted for an all-court press instead of a series of localised contests. It's also going to be really interesting to see how this impacts the women's game, whose test window ended before this law came into effect. The biggest difference between men's and women's rugby over the last 5 years has been how the game's meta has consistently weighted possession as more important than territory, with long 10+ phase sequences of play much more common in women's rugby than men's. As such, aerial contests are much rarer in the women's game because you might as well keep the ball in hand when you're in this midfield position, with teams clearing long instead usually when they do go to kick. As such, it's going to be fascinating if this starts to change that. If instead of clearing like Italy's men, we start to see more teams kick high and contestable like Scotland, where ball back sides often kick to avoid conceding a turnover or being pushed backwards by a defence. We might see women's sides hang similar kicks simply because it's easier to win that one contest on the wing than to play 15 phases around halfway for the same territorial gain. This could really suit sides stuffed with kicking options like Ireland and perhaps particularly Wales, who need a reboot after a tough year and are blessed with 2 superb kicking nines and some really hard-working wingers. We're heading into a World Cup year and the ramifications of this could be enormous. If somebody other than England or New Zealand could be the first team to nail the aerial game, they could go on to become the story of the World Cup. And those 30-metre chunks of territory combined with the possession and broken field possibilities that can create could be a real game changer for the entire tournament. And likewise, we've already started to see its impact at club level. Sale, Ospreys and Toulon are the teams who kick the most off 9 in the Premiership, URC and top 14 respectively. So therefore, the teams this law is affecting the most. Before the law came in, Sale were at 3 wins from 7 games, Ospreys 2 from 7 and Toulon 3 from 8. However, since referees made that change in their mindset, Sale have 6 wins from 9, Ospreys 4 wins in the draw from 6 and Toulon have won 9 from 10. Obviously there's other factors at play here, but strengthening the chase has allowed teams of good kicking scrum halves to lean into that strength harder than ever. A strength previously shared by everyone has become a USP, something to build an entire game around. And even within those teams, they've started to adapt differently. Toulon and particularly Sale have both had the kind of dummy bomb where they'll look to put the ball behind the winger, waiting, expecting that aerial contest. Where Ospreys have continued their tactic of largely smashing the opposition catcher once they catch the ball to attack the breakdown on the following phase, but because the winger now has a clear run, rather than dodging and darting around forwards, it means they can make another 10 full meters whilst the ball is in the air. So instead of kicking 30 meters as before, they now kick 40 and go for the same result, a massive tackle and set the defense on top. Something that's allowed them to dominate territory in 5 of their 6 games. In 3 of them, that stat floating around the 60% mark. Because the Springboks similarly haven't changed tactics at all. Colby and Amundsen are so good at weaving between convoys that it meant they were always attempting to compete in the air anyway. And as such, this has just allowed them to win an even greater percentage of those battles in the air. A standard strength has become a super strength, and given the Boks even more chances to remain in control of the match, which they really needed. We needed the Springboks to have more strengths. I was just thinking that. However, perhaps the most effective and interesting tactic so far has come from New Zealand and Scott Robertson, who instead of trying to win it in the air by clean out jumping and out catching the fullbacks, are regularly using these kind of low Milner scuddering kicks along the ground from 9, and when they do box kick, which is still pretty often, they are just flinging their wingers in the catcher's eye line and trying to force knock-ons and work their way up the pitch set piece after set piece. Mark Talea is particularly great at this, just lobbing himself in the way in the eye line. And yet the Kiwis also highlight the most interesting aspect of the shift on the other side, as after a few years where almost all of their kicking was done off 9 because it's safer, we saw a much more even split between the scrum half and fly half last autumn. Because New Zealand have been clearing long from around the 22, often off 10, Ireland here have dropped back behind the halfway line, and it means when Ratimer hangs his kind of middle distance kick, much shorter than being expected by Frawley, it catches the fullback off guard, and he has to sprint 30 metres to get up and catch it, messing up his approach and dropping the ball cold, giving them a knock on without having to put any pressure on. Where other teams are scrambling to find that best way to deal, New Zealand brilliantly lent into that, targeting backfields, adapting to shifting trends, and keeping tactical kicking in a much more in-the-moment manner, able to exploit folk in tiny, brilliant ways. The other team to try a similar situational approach was England. In the Six Nations and particularly the World Cup, the Rose Gang built things around repeatable ideas, around stuff they knew they could do and get right time after time, every time they could, providing the effort was there. So they devised a kick chase tactic, put huge pressure on the catcher, and just did it every time the ball slowed down or the defence got on top over an entire game. Instead, this autumn, we've seen them change system with huge regularity, looking to catch oppositions out, with a lot more little kicks off 10, dinks in behind, and varied kicks off 9. England were actually kicking more needed in the Six Nations, but the casual observer, it felt like they're hitting it less because the types of kick they're putting in are so much more varied, there's less repetition. However, the law does also work the other way around. We all got quite used to these long box kick battles at the World Cup, like this one. Percentage rugby, where teams would send not just the winger, their quickest player, to get in the air, but also a supporting group of forwards looking for a quick tap back, meaning if the winger went up straight for the ball and lost, there'd still be someone in a position to smash everyone. Instead now, we're seeing teams use wingers to lead chase alone, partly to prevent blocking penalties going against them, but largely just because it's less necessary if your winger can make up 30 metres now instead of 20. Now there's fewer obstacles in that way. And in turn, as previously mentioned, this is presenting more counter-attack opportunities. As the fullback, instead of beating 3 or 4 of them, you've only got to beat 1 to get on the front foot and create ball for your team to play off or potentially open straight up for a try. This isn't to say kick tennis is going away, far from it, just that the tactical ramifications of every exchange are going to be greater, that the risk is bigger, and the way teams play it more varied, and hence battles become more exciting, largely because there isn't one weapon in the arsenal that's more powerful than anything else anymore. Where those box kick battles used to be 2 teams exchanging the same type of kick back and forth, trying to pressure the opposition into an error, if we look at the only one we had over the autumn, just the one, as a free-flowing game between England and Australia tightened up in the last 10 minutes, we can see a perfect example of how this new law has created a more interesting game. Because nobody has cracked that meta, this box kick battle became a proper back and forth, starting with a long hoof. Smith then opts to run it back, making it up the 10 metre line. England kick broadly to compete, 20 metres-ish, looking to get slight home up in the air. Australia, however, then go longer in return, aiming to swallow the fullback up and press defensively. Ford is smothered, and seeing how Australia are playing this, England go longer themselves now, smashing McDermott himself after the catch. And fascinatingly, Australia do the same and opt to go contestable themselves, copying England's tactic in turn, but Jorgensen's beaten in the air for the ball, and after setting it properly, the other effect comes into play. Salikoa Lotto gets through and blocks the ball. A charge down with the ball into touch, giving advantage Australia. Without blockers in place, every box kick has been reduced to a one-on-one battle. The 82 kg humanoid Harry Randall trying to sling an egg past a charged up literal behemoth in Salikoa Lotto. The fascinating thing is, England have made 30 metres of the kicking battle, but aren't content with their net gain, setting up to box kick contestable again before that charge down. Much as a dominant scrum and maul can allow a team with a dominant pack to progress from their own 22 to opposition try line without making a pass, this law change now in turn allows box kicking to turn into a much more offensive strategy. The previous conservative option can now be used aggressively to work your way downfield at a rate of knots if your scrum half and winger are good enough and your forwards can make that work defensively. There are countless other ways World Rugby could have adjusted the game to ease complaints about too many box kicks, but the brilliant thing about this law is they haven't fundamentally nerfed the tactic for anyone legitimately good at it. A Conor Murray, Faf de Klerk or Ben Youngs will still be exceptional as a kicking scrum half, and when paired with a Freddie Stewart, a Kurt Lianza or an Emiliano Buffelli, you can build your game around their abilities and build an even more effective tactic than it would have been a year ago. This interpretation tweak has only widened the range of tactical options. Instead of quelling the box kick, they've tweaked the game so the strategy is no longer inherently overpowered, but rather a tactic that's only any use if you have someone world class at it amongst your ranks. The product on the pitch is currently the best it's ever been. There are presently more great teams in international rugby than there's ever been before, and thanks to the superb new law, they're about to play even more differently than they ever did before as well.
Thank you for watching that. I guess that's sort of the first video of 2025 because the team of the year was sort of 2024. But welcome. We're back ahead of the Six Nations. There's going to be a full preview of that tournament looking at all 6 teams coming next Tuesday, hopefully, maybe.
And in addition to that, we're going to do an individual preview on all of the Six Nations. They're going to be on the More Squidge Rugby channel, so each team's going to get an individual preview, which is exciting. We're having a chat about how each team's going to do and a bit of analysis.
We're going to blow out each kind of point from the main preview and expand it and talk for sort of half an hour or so on each team in the Six Nations. Those will be starting in the next couple of days, possibly tomorrow. So please go and have a look at the More Squidge Rugby channel, have a look around there. There's going to be plenty more going up, going around, going off over the course of the next few weeks.
Do you want to know why that is?
Why is that?
Because there's going to be a load of, and you're not going to believe this.
No, can't. What are we talking? Squash? Baseball? Brian May? Is he going to come?
Rugby.
The next one is on me, okay?
Oh shit. Yeah, absolutely.